If you watch my video about the language school reviews from 11 major cities across 5 continents, you'll remember that we proved that for the most part, the average language consumer has a very little precise idea what they're exactly buying. In all the reviews, no one mentioned anything that a teacher would find important. It's quite fascinating. And people can rarely gauge the technical quality of the teacher, of the method, or even of the command of the foreign language. Just read any language school review. They'll never talk about anything technical, and it is a big problem, being in the dark and having to buy something you don't understand. So to help parents and adults measure their uncertainty in choosing a good French tutor, I thought I'd make this video. Because they know something's off, but they don't quite know why. How far can one go in the level of French tutoring? How much is enough, even if it is for the kids' homework? Is my French tutor even good at French? Are they at that level? I chose as an example Mr. Steve Kaufmann, and I can already hear people say, Chris, you're comparing apples and oranges. You're a university qualified teacher, he's not. How is this relevant? Precisely. It's because he isn't a teacher and he isn't trying to tutor kids either. But he does speak French, and we can use his French to illustrate a point. My point here is to illustrate that it's not so easy to evaluate the level of French of a person, even if it is for kids. He's a well-respected business owner, if you'd never heard of him, in the field of languages, and he does know French, and will use his French to illustrate the intricacies that separate the qualified teacher from the parent's impression, how I see things, versus how you might see things. Let's see what we find out from Steve Kaufmann's command of French. Wasn't too bad of an intro. Okay, let's get into it. So, well, I started with his oldest video from his channel on YouTube, and it's called Pour mieux apprendre les langues, faites moins d'efforts. So that means to learn languages better, make less effort. I liked it. After watching it, I have to say I liked it. If this was for a French tutor, for my kids, I'd already be favourably inclined. Sorry, I have to redo the pronunciation of the video. So it's called Pour mieux apprendre les langues, faites moins d'efforts. The video seemed genuinely improvised, so I think it gives us a fair level of his French, which is fair play on his part, because I know it's not easy. And as a parent, I would like that, because it's always a good sign, that a tutor is able to speak independently. But is it enough? Dun, dun, dun. My own impression of this video is that I found that he got his point across in French, and at this stage I'd be tempted to give him the job. It's a bit like Dragon's Den, isn't it? I'm going to make you an offer. I am going to make you an offer. Steve's palms are sweating. Oh, he's going to make me an offer. I understood what Steve was on about. However, little problems can turn into big problems, as we'll see. And remember, I want to get the job done right for my kids. I don't just want any tutor. As Theopothesis would say, if I was to invest my grandkids' inheritance in your etc, etc, I'm thinking the same way. The issue with this particular video was really, how would a real Francophone actually say things? And I felt that it almost seemed like Steve knew the words, he knows the French words, but doesn't quite know how to structure the discourse. It almost seems like every little sentence was its own battle to be won, and then the next sentence, and then the next sentence. And I'd like to zoom in on one sentence in particular to illustrate, to dissect the problem. When he says, moi je ne suis pas tellement d'accord là-dessus, in reference to an idea that another polyglot from Ireland had about learning. Now the natural way of saying it is, moi je ne suis pas tellement d'accord avec ça, moi je ne suis pas tellement d'accord avec lui, in reference to the person. However, we are beyond just correcting someone, and that's not what I'm doing in this video. We're light years beyond that, because there is a way to use the preposition sur, just not in this case. Nous sommes tous d'accord là-dessus, on s'est mis d'accord là-dessus. In business meetings, for example. So Steve is right, just not in this case. For you watching this at home, you might think, well, I can't measure the problem, I don't speak French. Is Chris just making problems? It looked like Peter Jones was on board with the idea, and now he isn't. What does Peter Jones see? You say, it seems fine to me. My question to you is, would you find this mistake acceptable from an English tutor? It would be the equivalent of saying in English, I'm not agree on that. And your child would ask the tutor, do we say I don't agree with that? When do we use on that versus with that? And here we open the door to true expertise that a lot of parents want. A true expert bilingual will be able to instantly produce multiple examples and tell you exactly what you should say and when. Can Steve do that? Will I hire him? How much does it affect the trust of the parents if the English teacher says, I don't agree on that? Je ne suis pas d'accord là-dessus. Je suis pas d'accord because he dropped the negative. Je suis pas d'accord là-dessus. Could such a sentence be reason enough to irreparably break the trust in the tutor? Our friend Steve then goes on to say, je vois souvent des discussions sur les différentes méthodes d'apprentissage et qu'est-ce qui est efficace. Je vois souvent des discussions sur les différentes méthodes d'apprentissage et qu'est-ce qui est efficace. So now you have a French tutor who's placing qu'est-ce que in the middle of a sentence. That's just really basic knowledge of when to place qu'est-ce que versus est-ce que or ce que in a sentence. For the record, qu'est-ce que never in the middle of a sentence. And not being sure of the gender of the word méthode, which frankly is forgivable. At this stage, as a parent, if this was a tutor, my trust is almost broken. Because I don't know what else is hiding behind there. I don't know if when my kids ask a question, they'll get the right answer. Then I have a third example, still from the same video, in which we'll open a door that is barely ever opened on YouTube, and which I will open for you. A door onto the higher levels. And bravo, by the way, for staying this long. Because now you'll see wizard level stuff. Okay? If you've been paying attention, I'm moving well beyond what is grammatically correct or not in French. This is not what we're doing here. He says, est-ce qu'on doit utiliser des systèmes pour aider la mémoire comme Anki? Est-ce qu'on doit utiliser des systèmes pour aider la mémoire comme Anki? Now the problem is that Anki isn't a system. Aha. And a true educated Francophone would likely not define Anki as a system. Anki isn't a system. The word système triggers a completely different picture in the mind of a Francophone. In my opinion, there is a technical word for this problem. It's called lexical abstraction. Lexical abstraction. If the tutor doesn't live inside a modern Francophone ecosystem, his brain cannot instantly retrieve the precise objects, nouns that define daily life. Instead, he grabs a massive, foggy umbrella word, such as système, to cover his tracks. Better French words to describe Anki would have been j'utilise des logiciels comme Anki, software. J'utilise des applications comme Anki. I use apps like Anki. J'utilise des outils de mémorisation comme Anki, or even j'utilise des systèmes de répétition espacés comme Anki. To make it quite clear, I'm not fussing about the fact that my kid's French tutor didn't use the word système correctly. I'm stressing because it shows a disconnect with French. In English, it's like saying you can travel by sea, by air, by road, or with other travel paths. Well, it sounds weird because I wouldn't have defined the sea as a travel path, even though it sort of seems to make sense. I still wouldn't want that to end up in my kid's essay for school. And if this error is possible, well, what else is possible? To be fair, I have no idea in German if the word das System is appropriate to speak of a loudspeaker or a light switch. And I really don't know when to use the word Anlage, or where the definition of one stops, or where the definition of the other starts. Then again, I don't take on the responsibility of tutoring kids in German for that reason. Anlage versus System, I have no clue. When you speak a language as a native, you instinctively realize which word projects which shared definition onto people. So when I want to define Anki, the word système would not be my first choice. This makes for clumsy speaking. Steve probably should have used the word méthode or programme, because it helps to place Anki within the computer world, and it helps the listener understand that Anki is tied somehow to computers or IT, even without knowing the brand. But to know this, you have to be able to weigh the words and have an awareness of how people perceive French. For parents, it really isn't easy choosing a good French tutor. Even when he builds a very literate sentence in French, there's still a risk, because we might say, wow, that sounded quite brainy, that's the tutor for my kids. For example, rien ne nuit au plaisir de la lecture autant que les questions de compréhension. J'ai mal compris, c'est pas grave, c'est ma langue, c'est je suis en train d'apprendre, c'est entre moi et le texte, et petit à petit, je vais mieux comprendre. Nothing detracts from the pleasure of reading, these are Steve's words by the way, nothing detracts from the pleasure of reading as much as questions of comprehension. I misunderstand, it's not a big deal, it's my language, it's something I'm learning, it's between me and the text, and little by little I understand better. This powerful statement resonates well in English, but in French, what does it even mean? What is une question de compréhension? What do you mean by une question de compréhension? Do we mean words or questions about the story? And what are we reading? It seems to mean something in French, but I don't visualize mentally what it means in French. When he says, c'est ma langue, well, in English, it's my language, you're emphasizing the possessive, it signals belonging. It's a different language system. Doesn't work that way in French. You can't just say c'est ma langue. It's my language, okay? Ownership, not so in French. That sentence would have been better translated by as cette langue est à moi. It would have been better translated as cette langue est à moi instead of c'est ma langue. So what happens if my kids ask their French tutor, what's the difference between je te parle and je parle à toi? What happens if the tutor doesn't know? And if he did know, why did he say it right? Cette langue est à moi. Overall, I don't want to be cruel, I didn't find that this video contained a single grammatical thought that was complex and well built without interruptions like constantly. When he speaks about his book, j'avais mis sur enfin, comment dirais-je, front page de mon livre, j'ai mis un arbre, c'est l'arbre de Dranze, et Dranze, c'est un philosophe de taoïste, et pour lui, il faut que nous apprenions, il faut que nous fassions des choses sans effort. I think Dranze is actually Zhuangzi. I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm fairly sure it's not Dranze. Anyway, Zhuangzi. So, right, if my kid's French tutor said this, I would be worried. Frankly, I would be worried. I don't care how brainy it sounds. If this was a tutor, well, I'd say no. Sorry, mate, no, you know, you're not getting the job. But maybe he'll do better in the next video. Let's see. This second video I found much better. And if it was for parents looking for a tutor, this would be much better. Even if he does say in his opening statement that he doesn't believe that public servants, les fonctionnaires, should be allowed to strike. They should not have the right to strike. He says it's a way of thinking that dates back to when capitalists were exploiting workers. So he says it's outdated, essentially. The idea of striking, he says it's outdated. And these capitalists, the evil capitalists, forced workers to work in bad conditions. So back then it was relevant to strike, but now it isn't. I wouldn't want to let my kids hear that. But we're looking for a French tutor, not an expert on labour relations. In this second video, I much liked his fluidity, I must say. What I liked is that it sounded very grown up, very brainy. A few mistakes, such as using the word classe, on voit dans les classes, which doesn't necessarily refer to school. I would have said on voit dans les écoles, or on voit à l'école instead of dans les classes. Again, this is a matter of knowing what mental pictures function in the Francophone brain. Then he went on to say something about having to love languages to learn well, which he somehow contrasted with a current trend in podcasts and schools, and it started to be a bit clumsily constructed, but still sounded brainy. I mean, the construction was clumsy, but it still sounded brainy. He tells us, il faut aimer les langues, il faut aimer ce qu'on apprend, donc il faut que l'apprenant puisse choisir des choses agréables. Malheureusement, non seulement dans les classes, mais même quand on voit maintenant les podcasts, etc., c'est tout plein de... Enfin, en anglais, on dit worksheet exercises. On veut toujours introduire des choses qui ne sont pas intéressantes, pas utiles, mais qui font l'affaire des gens qui enseignent. What can I say? I'm not so sure that as a parent I would let my kid choose so-called fun stuff to learn French. Nor do I understand why exercise sheets aren't effective. Choosing fun stuff hasn't looked that efficacious for the tutor himself. It is what he did, and I'm not impressed. A true Francophone would not have said les gens qui enseignent, simply because in Francophone culture you don't refer to teachers as des gens, like some people, the people who teach. What do you mean, the people who teach? No, it doesn't work that way. It's a bit dismissive, and it shows that same disconnect with French coming back again and again. I'm also quite sure that the verb aimer was not the right verb. I'm really not sure if he means in this context, if he means loving languages, as in the act of learning, or the discovery of a culture through languages. Like, there's a lot of vagueness here in his French sentence. But what's amazing is that it does work in English, because English is a lot more vague than French will ever be. French words tend to have more meaning attached to them. You can't just say, il faut aimer les langues, because what does it even bloody mean? I also wouldn't have used the word agréable in the context of learning. It's not the right adjective for that context. Un cours agréable would actually be a joke. It would be a good joke to place. Oh, il était agréable ce cours, meaning we did F all. So as you can see, over and over again, it's extremely hard for parents to gauge the worth of a tutor. Once you start to take the thing apart, we see many cracks in the armour. Then he goes on to say, et qui finalement, qui manque, qui ne tiennent pas compte du fait que le plus important, c'est le temps qu'on va passer avec la langue. Donc il faut encourager les gens à passer beaucoup de temps à écouter et à lire et à apprendre des mots. C'est tout. Si j'étais enseignant, mon but ce serait... Which is interesting because he admits that he's not a teacher. Comment est-ce que je peux inciter mes élèves à passer non pas 1 heure par semaine, mais 5 heures par semaine avec la langue? C'est tout. There's several things to say here. French doesn't work like English does. Words don't have that elasticity as they do in English. When you say in French, le temps qu'on passe avec la langue, we actually picture the unit of time, minutes, hours. So now I'm starting to think that learning is a matter of amounts of time, you know, like a stopwatch. In English, when you say the time you spend with a language, it can imply the quality of that time. And for the rest of his argumentation, he seems to say that you have to learn words and that people should spend time doing it. He uses the verb inciter, inciter les élèves, which does not mean to encourage. It rather means negatively influence. It's not used in the right context. He's not using the verb inciter in the right context. Now, imagine that your kid is asking their tutor what the difference is between inciter and encourager. You should be able to answer that on the spot without even thinking. Also, when he says passer du temps avec la langue, really does imply passivity. Doing nothing, being passive. Spending in English can imply activity, right? In this context, it doesn't work in French. Passer du temps avec la langue. I don't picture a person being active. I picture a person being passive. So the argumentation in French comes across as put the hours in. It's a question of hours. And in French, instead of this advice sounding encouraging and inspiring, it comes across as dreadfully dull. It's like a 1970s or a 1980s type school dull. I swear this on my honour, that when I hear this from Steve, it brings me right back to dusty school teachers. It was all about discipline and not sticking out, not being different, the norm. It brings me right back to the 80s, it sounds so disciplinarian, but here he is trying to presumably sell, modern app or something, but you see the level of disconnect. He just sounds so disciplinarian. It sounds so outdated to my native ear, and all this is created through a use of the French language that's a language in which the words weigh differently than in English. The conclusion to this second video is that what I've seen, what I've heard, does not encourage me, sadly, to give the job to this tutor for my kids. I would not let this tutor my kids in French. But let's see what happens in the third video. So here we have a third video, which I liked, frankly, because Steve presents himself as a person who speaks 10 languages. He speaks about the book he wrote also, and he's the president of a linguistics institute, which is nice, I think, for a tutor to be. I mean, especially if it's for my kids, I would want that. And he tells us, de mon avis, un linguiste, c'est quelqu'un qui sait parler beaucoup de langues. Oh, that wasn't good at all. Oh no. Because I might as well say, in my opinion, a house is a thing on which there's a door. Just joking, just joking. Are people just allowed to make up their definitions of what a linguist is? He then goes on to explain a bit of his philosophy as a linguist, which is someone who knows many languages, according to his definition. Il faut savoir apprendre comme un enfant. Un enfant n'apprend pas les règles de grammaire. Un enfant écoute. En écoutant, il apprend des mots et les expressions. Et quand l'enfant est prêt et se sent confiant, l'enfant commence à utiliser ces mots et ces expressions pour parler. Well, first of all, that's not entirely true, because in French-speaking schools, we actually had to remember some grammar about French. Le participe passé employé avec être s'accorde en genre et en nombre, and you Francophones know what I'm on about. But it doesn't matter, really. What interests me more is the depth of meaning. I would find this satisfactory, and I would trust my kids with such a French tutor. Yes, I would. The pronunciation is good, and even the rhythm in this third video. It sounds very grown up and even educated, if I'm honest, which I am. Where it falls short and where it doesn't work is, again, that ideas that work in English don't work in French. English is a lot more vague. We can say, when the kid is ready, he'll use the words, okay? If we started to say, oh really? Ready for what? Does he tell himself, okay, I'm ready? Well, it sounds foolish in English, doesn't it? We just accept the statement, okay, when the kid's ready, okay, let's not overanalyze this thing. The problem is that French does work in this way, mate. So saying l'enfant est prêt really does signal a sort of threshold. It really does mean self-awareness. Okay, I'm ready. So freely discoursing on linguistics theories can't necessarily be done in French like that. If my kid had homework to do for school in French and Steve had to help him, I'm not entirely sure that the teacher would grade it in the same way that Steve intended. When he says l'enfant se sent confiant, it's probably, yeah, when the kid feels safe. How would you translate that? When l'enfant se sent confiant, when he feels safe? Not sure how I would translate that. Well, anyway, I can't picture that in French. Un enfant qui se sent confiant, it doesn't convey any sort of mental picture. Well, it does, but the wrong one. Because it would imply some sort of threat. Is the kid feeling threatened in any way? You know, is it regarding the parents or the listeners? Is the kid self-aware? And beyond that, have we even ever checked if this is correct or factual? Can you just say, you know, when the day the kid feels comfortable, comfortable, that was a good translation. When the kid feels comfortable, he'll start to use words and expressions that he hears around him. Whoever said that? I think that overall Steve did a reasonable job here. But we also see that a deeper study of French, a real awareness of how it works, is sometimes necessary when we choose a tutor for our kids. Because when Steve says un adulte a déjà beaucoup de mots dans sa propre langue, et puis deuxièmement un adulte sait lire, et troisièmement un adulte peut utiliser LingQ, yeah, that's the name of his business, LingQ, I would be worried if it was for my kids' homework. I would genuinely be worried if this was for a class presentation in school. Because when we say un adulte a beaucoup de mots dans sa propre langue, what does it mean? That the adult has the knowledge of many words? Or that the language contains many words? It's a bit of a clumsy construction here. So if my kid asked the tutor if avoir is always the best verb to signal possession, well, the tutor should bloody well have the answer. What does it mean? Un adulte a beaucoup de mots dans sa propre langue. You mean possessing, or do you mean understands the presence of many words, or is aware that there are many words in the language, or has command over these words? I mean, what do you mean? The word deuxièmement seems to set up a big argument, but then the sentence that follows is quite short. I'd be worried if my kid asked the tutor when to use deuxièmement, troisièmement, quatrièmement, because in this case, the tutor doesn't seem to know. And with troisièmement, the sequence of events falls flat, because we go from a big, wide life example to a highly specific product. It's like saying in English, listen to this, it's like saying an adult can drive a car, an adult can park at a beauty spot, and an adult can wear Timberlands. What was that third one? You know, it's not the best phrasing ever. It's called the fallacy of relevance, technically. It's called a false parallelism. It's a false parallelism. So I won't go any further. I think you get my point, at least I hope so. I think that when we look at the command of a language in depth, as we should, we see that even for children, a structured class for children requires a high level of command of that language. And what sometimes seems like good enough approximation can reveal massive problems that are going on under the hood, in the background. Your child or yourself should be able to ask any question about French, whatever language you're studying, if it's not French, and have an answer that is reliable. You should be able to ask your tutor for that answer. So we have to be careful of the fact that studying one or even multiple languages does not automatically make us an authority to teach it. And as we saw in this video, it's much harder than first appears to judge of the true command of a language, in this case French. My name's Chris. I'm a French tutor for adults. Find me at wecommunicate.com. I hope this was useful. Thank you very much. See you in the next one.